This demo will just get you acquainted with the producer and consumer example so that we can then move on to a little bit more complicated concepts and use this same example. So in the producer-consumer example, we have 4 classes. If you're following along with your own code, this code is found in the cubbyhole subdirectory. So the classes are the producer-consumer test, which has the main method in it. It has the producer, which is the thread that creates some numbers. So the producer extends the thread class, and it has a private member that is a cubbyhole. When we create the producer, it gets a cubbyhole and it gets a number, which is that producer's number. And then when it runs its run method, it loops through 10 times and it puts a number and I into the cubbyhole, and then it sleeps for a random amount of time, and then it tries and does it again. So the producer just goes through and puts numbers into the cubbyhole. The consumer, on the other hand, also extends thread, also has a cubbyhole, has a very similar constructor, but in its run method, all it does is get the item that's in the cubbyhole by looking up the particular number. So if it's consumer number 1, it looks up the cubbyhole and it passes in its number. So what does this cubbyhole look like? It's a class that has some contents that is an integer, has an available field that we're not using right at the moment. Its get method takes an integer to identify who's getting the number, and it just prints out the consumer, what number it was, got the contents, and then it returns the contents. The put method, similar. It just says the producer, and whichever producer it was, put the contents. And this is so that we could run this little example with more than one consumer and more than one producer and see what goes on. And then in the test, all we're doing right now is we're making a new cubbyhole, we're making a producer and passing it the cubbyhole, and it's producer number 1, and we're making a consumer and passing it the cubbyhole, and it's consumer number 1. And if to understand this, you have to remember that in Java, this C that we're passing in is a reference to a memory location. So this producer and this consumer now each have a pointer to exactly the same location in memory, because that's somewhat important to understanding how this goes. And then we call the start method on each of these threads and see what happens. So we're going to run that. And we can see that producer 1 put in a 0, which is what it's supposed to do. And then consumer 1 got a whole pile of zeros, and then producer 1 put in the rest of the numbers. So that's not exactly what was supposed to happen. Ideally, producer 1 will put in a 0, consumer 1 will get a 0, producer 1 will put in a 1, consumer 1 will get a 1, and that isn't what happened at all. And again, because this is all threaded, we've got no guarantee that if we run it again, we'll get the same results. In fact, at this time, producer 1 got its 0 in there partway after consumer 1 got 3 zeros out of it. So this isn't really doing what we wanted it to do, and we could try and make it work. We could go into the cubbyhole and start trying to use this available field and maybe make a method that says, well, if the thing has a number available, then we get it, but if it doesn't, then we don't. I will leave that kind of playing around as an exercise for you. It's not the best way to solve this problem. So we're going to talk a little bit in the slide deck about some of the ways we can solve this problem, and then we'll come back for another demo with the rest of the ideas.